Did Canada's longest-serving Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, suffer from a psychological disorder?
What is a psychological disorder? Mental illnesses are conditions that affect your thinking, feeling, mood, and behavior. They may be occasional and they may be chronic. They can affect your ability to relate to others and function each day. We have come to the conclusion that Mackenzie King suffered from anxiety, depression, PTSD, hallucinations, and he was a very antisocial man.
Who is this man pictured? He is Mackenzie King. Mackenzie King was Canada's longest-serving Prime Minister from 1919 to 1948. He was the leader of the Liberal Party, elected in 1919. He guided the country through 6 years of conflict and oversaw a massive war effort. He was accused of having a psychological disorder. The question is, did he actually suffer from one though?
Words are sometimes inadequate to describe a man's popularity among his fellow men. Of Canada's Prime Minister, Mackenzie King, one only needs to say that he held office longer than any elected leader in the history of English-speaking peoples. A total of 21 years, 5 months, and 5 days. In the too often fickle world of politics, this record more than speaks for the warmth and astuteness of the Canadian statesman.
The answer. Mackenzie King did suffer from a psychological disorder. This is shown through conversation with the dead, the loneliness that he underwent through life, and the decisions that he made while in Parliament.
Speaking to the dead, Mackenzie King wrote that he believed that his dead mother tried to contact him in December 1944. Mackenzie King received a letter from a man that informed him that his dead mother was trying to reconnect with him. Mackenzie King believed the letter because his shaving lather contained shapes that resembled his mother and 2 of his dogs. He sought out political advice from his dog when he was still alive. His special dog, who is pictured here, was named Pat, and King called him a God-sent little angel in the disguise of a dog.
How his mother's death affected him. After King's mother's death, he tried to regain contact with her. Through mediums, they talked about making contact through the Bible. In 1932, King became a professional spiritualist. At that, he said he did get contact with his mother. In 1933, King started table rapping, where he would sit at a table with Mrs. Patterson and believe he was in contact with the spirits. He wrote on paper all the conversations he had with the deceased people. On his 60th birthday, he not only talked to family, but also to previous great liberal leaders. Mackenzie King looked for support and friendship in the spirits, and not so much for answers in how he should lead the country.
How loneliness contributed. Mackenzie King was never married. The only person he had to talk to was his neighbor in Kingsmere, Mrs. McCurry. She remembered him as a very lonely man. Mackenzie King was even once described as the loneliest man in Canada. Years leading up to his Liberal leadership were filled with devastation. First, his sister Bella died in 1915. Second, his father, John died in 1916. Then third and most tragic and closest to King was the death of his mother. Isabel died in 1917. His brother Max then died in 1922. Lastly, the death of Wilfrid Laurier in February 1919 was also hard on King because he looked up to Laurier as a mentor, father figure, and friend.
King enjoyed being alone in Kingsmere, Quebec. He even built his own fake ruins using old demolished buildings from Canada abroad. King loved his ruins for their beauty and symbolism. He liked to romanticize his ruins. Mackenzie King lived by himself in Wilfrid Laurier's old house. On the second level of this old house, you could find his sad bedroom. This bedroom only consisted of photos of his dead family and of his dog Pat. King found serenity in living in Laurier's house because it allows him to have the spiritual connection to his deceased friend.
King never truly recovered from the trauma of having lost so many loved ones. This affected his ability to relate to others, which forced him to be forever alone. He felt more of an affectionate connection to post-war ruins that symbolized destruction than to an actual living human. The connection that he has to destruction relates to how he felt after all the trauma he has survived while losing many loved ones, which is why he has chosen to love the ruins over any human.
Sexuality and women. A more balanced view would be that King was never fully comfortable with his sexuality and that the particulars of his sex life remain uncertain. He was recognized as a ladies' man and was acquainted with many women. Pictured above, Mab Moss and Matilda Grossert were two of the women that he was acquainted with. As a political man, he was to profess his love to the poor. The private King was to admire women of wealth. He liked older women as well because he thought of them as a mother more than as a lover. He sought out an older woman that was exactly like his mother, but he never found one. Since King was never completely comfortable with his sexuality, it never allowed him to make the appropriate connections with the woman to have her become his wife. King's idea of interacting with women who resembled his mother was his way of reconnecting with her. These decisions were not of the norm from a man of this time. Due to the loss of many family members in the span of 3 years, this left Mackenzie King forever searching for a nurturer to replace the missing loved ones.
His decisions as a Canadian leader. King's immigration policies often revealed racist attitudes. He wanted to keep labor relations conflict-free. He discouraged Japanese, Chinese, and Indian immigration because bringing in cheap foreign labor would add industrial conflict. King also did not want to accept Jewish refugees. King also wrote in his diary in 1938, "We must nevertheless seek to keep this part of the continent free from unrest and from too great an intermixture of foreign strains of blood, as much the same thing as lies at the basis of the Oriental problem. I fear we would have riots if we agreed to a policy that admitted numbers of Jews." King suspected a link between his deep desires to avoid war and the inaccurate manifestations of the spirits.
In 1923, King passed the Chinese Immigration Act. This act banned most forms of Chinese immigration to Canada. King's racist actions reflect on his ability to relate to people of another race or ethnicity, which is related to his psychological disorder. King had a strong desire to keep Canada free of foreigners. King had a strong hatred towards conflict and war, as it meant more death and loss, which he could not endure, which is why he did not want immigrants in his country causing problems. Going into World War II, King did not know what Canada's role would be. However, looking back at World War I, he understood what an unrestricted war effort could do to his country.
Mackenzie King led a country long divided over external policy ununitedly into World War II in 1939. King overcame two political crises over conscription, one nearly fatal to his government, and he had won the post-war election. The government he led organized a tremendous military, industrial, and financial contribution to the war, and at the same time prepared for a smooth and rapid advance in economic development and social welfare afterwards. When King retired, Louis Saint Laurent took over a strong government, a united and effective political party, and a rapidly growing and self-confident country that Mackenzie King had made and led for him. Not only did King lead Canada through World War II, he led them through industrialization and most of the Great Depression.
The Governor-General of Canada, His Excellency the Earl of Athlone, accompanied by the Premier, Mr. Mackenzie King, visits Valcartier Camp, Canada's great military training center, and sees young Dominion soldiers in the making. By the time the sergeant majors have finished with these rookies, they'll be as businesslike as the regulars. On every face is written something or other which I can't see for the moment. They've only been at it for a few days, but after all, every soldier was a raw recruit once, so keep at it, fellows.
After his death on July 22, 1950, his personal diaries were released. These diaries allowed light to be shed on evidence of his psychological disorder. After the release of his diaries, they noticed that one of the pages had been ripped out and destroyed. This was due to his own spiritual belief, and the publisher of the diaries did not see the use of showing King's personal religious values.
Pictured is one of the pages from his diaries. This is one that he wrote on December 8, 1944, and it states, "Another thing in a way which might seem very foreign, but to me was very real, was in shaving. I was suddenly arrested to notice that the soap that I was putting on paper made three distinct bits of modeling. First was that of a dog, which I thought looked like old Pat. Then beneath him was another dog, crouching as my present little Pat is doing. As I walked by him in dictating, he just came into the room at the moment I began to dictate this. And the third was a bust of a woman, which was as like mother's head and shoulders in proportion as it could be. It all seemed to say to me, Mother is making clear her present and her spiritual power. These two little pats have been psychic forces and symbolic spirits many times through my life. Something seemed to say there must be a third in these little things, and tonight I was suddenly struck by the figures in the vote. 143 to 70. The 70 seemed to relate to my birthday. The 73 majority turned around to 37, the year of the rebellion. Taking the total vote, 213, subtracting 143, the vote the government received, leaving 70 of those opposed. Adding all these figures together brings a total of 21. This, coming into the third column, divided by 3, leaves number 7, which is a mystical number and which relates to the day on which the vote was taken. I have noticed in psychological happenings that there seems to be a little group that enjoys merriment, another that brings out the distinctly mystical on highest levels, and another group concerned with numbers and having them express significance. It is not without interest that all of these seem to want to figure in today's events. They have all done so in the manner represented here. I have never felt more peaceful than when I turned out the light after the music last night and went off to sleep. It was the peace of God which passeth all understanding. The day throughout has been a day of great peace of mind and heart and soul. In this journal entry, King speaks about his dead mother as well as his dead dogs. This relates back to him having PTSD and hallucinations that came from the strong connections he had with his now deceased mother and pets. He has fantasized about them so often that he has begun to visualize shapes from inanimate objects. He also strategically added and subtracted numbers of votes, his birthday, and divided other numbers so that they represented a mystical figure in his own mind. A man without mental health issues would not have come up with this conclusion that each certain number represents something spiritual, nor would he have envisioned shapes of the dead from a soap.
In conclusion, it is clear that Mackenzie King did suffer from a psychological disorder. It is not proven what condition the disorder was. It is shown through multiple pieces of evidence that includes him talking to the dead, never marrying but intrigued by prostitutes, constantly seeking older women that resembled his mother, and the decisions he made as Prime Minister.